stay in office until the end of your term, and that certainly reassured many in financial markets. What are the levers the government or the legislature have to pressure the Fed? And should one worry about threats to the Fed's independence once you're gone?
So our independence is a matter of law. Congress has, in our statute, we're not removable except for cause. We serve very long terms, seemingly endless terms. So we're protected in the law. So, Congress could change that law, but I don't think there's any danger of that. Fed independence has pretty broad support across both political parties and in both sides of the Hill. So I think that's not a problem. There's a Supreme Court case people will have read, probably in today's Journal, at which the Supreme Court may decide whether independent agencies generally, whether their authorizing laws can contain a provision that prevents the president from firing members of a commission other than for cause. And that's a case that people are talking about a lot. I don't think that decision will apply to the Fed, but I don't know. But it's a situation that we're monitoring carefully. Generally speaking, Fed independence is very widely understood and supported in Washington, in Congress, where it really matters. And the point is, we can make our decisions, and we will only make our decisions based on our best thinking, based on our best analysis of the data about what is the way to achieve our dual mandate goals as we can to best serve the American people. That's the only thing we're ever going to do. We're never going to be influenced by any political pressure. People can say whatever they want. That's fine. That's not a problem. But we will do what we do strictly without consideration of political or any other extraneous factors.
So prices haven't gone up. The only thing that's gone up actually is interest rates, because we have a Federal Reserve chairman that is playing politics. Somebody that I've never been very fond of, actually, but he's playing politics. Interest rates should be down now. They should be coming down. In Europe, as you know, they reduced them, I guess 7 times. It looks like they're going to reduce them again and again and again. But our guy wants to play cute. But interest rates are pretty much even. Maybe they went up just a slight bit, but that's the only thing. But that's because of the Federal Reserve, because they're not very smart people.
Do you regret nominating him? Do you regret nominating him, President? Do you regret nominating him, Jerome Powell?
Look, in the first 4 years, we had the greatest economy in the history of our country. The stock market went up 88 points. I think he's terrible, but I can't complain because we had the most successful administration economically in the history of our country. I think we're going to do even better this time, because you will see that the numbers that we're taking in are astronomical. We're taking in tremendous amounts of money with the tariffs. We were treated very unfairly on trade, and countries are having a hard time getting used to the fact that they can't do that to us anymore, because we have a real president. We have a president that understands what it's all about. We had presidents that, in some cases, were smart, but they didn't understand business, or they didn't like business, or, it wasn't like a priority. And then you had, like, the last administration, the only thing they were good at was cheating in elections. That's about all they could do. They couldn't do anything. They were useless. They were incompetent. Worst administration in the history of our country. Worse than Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter died a happy man. You know why? Because he wasn't the worst president. Joe Biden was. So I think you're going to see some fantastic numbers when this all happens. It's happening now. I mean, everybody wants to make a deal. And if they don't want to make a deal, we'll make the deal for them. Because that's what's going to happen. We're just saying this is what it is. But we want to listen to everybody.
I think the tariffs that we've placed on China are going to impose very significant burdens on American households. Now, of course, things are changing by the day there's at least a temporary reprieve on auto parts that we learned about today. But reasonable, estimates of the impact on the average American household of these tariffs, the whole program, but especially China, is around $4,000 per household. This isn't good, and most of these goods we can't produce in the United States, or if we were able to do so, it would take years to shift production. And, unfortunately, with the uncertainty that surrounds these policies, I think most businesses are in a situation where they must feel paralyzed. You don't know if it makes any sense to cease production in China and to move it to the United States. And unfortunately, some of our closest allies no longer believe commitments that we make are good and will remain in force. So if I were a business thinking about coming to the United States to get behind the tariff walls, I wouldn't feel confident that when my factory came online several years down the road, that the tariffs would still be there. Business investment in this type of environment, I would really expect it to decline. We would be lucky to skirt a recession.
We're in a crisis across the board, right? I mean, that is obvious for everyone to see. This is not normal. The president is assaulting the economy, assaulting Social Security, assaulting healthcare, assaulting the American way of life, and assaulting our democracy. None of this is normal. The Supreme Court needs to aggressively enforce its judicial orders. The White House is seeking a confrontation with the courts, then the courts need to lean into that. We will have the back of the courts, and it needs to use all of the tools available to it, like contempt,
for example,
in terms of the people within the administration who are failing to adhere to these judicial orders or who are actively continuing to propagate unlawful or unconstitutional actions at Donald Trump's direction.
America and China are now locked in a fierce contest for global supremacy. Neither country wants open conflict, but there is deep mistrust and suspicion on both sides. Miscalculations, especially over flashpoints like Taiwan, could trigger a broader and more dangerous escalation. Both powers claim they do not wish to force countries to choose sides. But in reality, each seeks to draw others closer into their respective orbits. This rivalry is already reshaping our world and will continue to define the geopolitical landscape for years to come. So we are in the midst of a messy transition globally. To what? Nobody can tell. America is stepping back from its traditional role as the guarantor of order and the world's policeman. But neither China nor any other country is willing or able to fill the vacuum. So nations are turning inward, prioritizing their own narrow interests. The once rising tide of global cooperation that defined the past decades is giving way to one of growing competition and distrust. And as a result, the world is becoming more fragmented and disorderly.
I am really worried about whether we are already in a recession or just right on the edge. All of the lights are flashing red. And Larry Fink points this out, but he is not the only one. There are a lot of folks who are starting to say this, and a lot of evidence in that direction. Where our focus should be right now is on preventing it from getting any worse. And we can do that. You know, this isn't some outside shock. This is not some war in some distant land that's caused this problem. This is not that the markets are imploding because suddenly all of the bad mortgages are coming to light, like in 2008. One person has started the dumbest trade war in the history of America. Congress has the power to rein that back in. And if Donald Trump and his team won't do it, then Congress should step up and do it before more damage is done. I am really worried about whether we are already in a recession or just right on the edge. All of the lights are flashing red. And Larry Fink points this out, but he is not the only one. There are a lot of folks who are starting to say this and a lot of evidence in that direction. Where our focus should be right now is on preventing it from getting any worse. And we can do that. You know, this isn't some outside shock. This is not some war in some distant land that's caused this problem. This is not that the markets are imploding because suddenly all of the bad mortgages are coming to light, like in 2008. One person has started the dumbest trade war in the history of America. Congress has the power to rein that back in. And if Donald Trump and his team won't do it, then Congress should step up and do it before more damage is done. I am really worried about whether we are already in a recession or just right on the edge. All of the lights are flashing red. And Larry Fink points this out, but he is not the only one. There are a lot of folks who are starting to say this and a lot of evidence in that direction. Where our focus should be right now is on preventing it from getting any worse. And we can do that. You know, this isn't some outside shock. This is not some war in some distant land that's caused this problem. This is not that the markets are imploding because suddenly all of the bad mortgages are coming to light, like in 2008. One person has started the dumbest trade war in the history of America. Congress has the power to rein that back in. And if Donald Trump and his team won't do it, then Congress should step up and do it before more damage is done.
We are engaged in a high-stakes AI arms race against China. And during my time at Meta, company executives lied about what they were doing with the Chinese Communist Party to employees, shareholders, Congress, and the American public. I sit before this committee today to set the record straight about these illegal and dangerous activities. Meta's dishonesty started with the betrayal of core American values. Mark Zuckerberg pledged himself a free speech champion. Yet I witnessed Meta work hand in glove with the Chinese Communist Party to construct and test custom-built censorship tools that silenced and censored their critics. When Beijing demanded that Facebook delete the account of a prominent Chinese dissident living on American soil, they did it, and then lied to Congress when asked about the incident in a Senate hearing. The willingness to censor was not the only troubling thing I witnessed. I watched as executives decided to provide the Chinese Communist Party with access to Meta user data, including that of Americans. Meta does not dispute these facts. They can't. I have the documents. As recently as this Monday, they claim that they do not operate their services in China. Another lie. In fact, they began offering products and services in China as early as 2014. That hasn't stopped. Their own SEC filings from last year show that China is now Meta's second biggest market. Meanwhile, Meta's AI model, Llama, has contributed significantly to Chinese advances in AI technologies like DeepSeek. Facebook's secret mission to get into China was called Project Aldrin and was restricted to need-to-know staff. There was no bridge too far. Meta built a physical pipeline connecting the United States and China. Meta executives ignored warnings that this would provide backdoor access to the Chinese Communist Party, allowing them to intercept the personal data and private messages of American citizens. The only reason China does not currently have access to US user data through this pipeline is because Congress stepped in.
Since retaking the White House, President Donald Trump has made some bold and seemingly irrational moves, upending the global trading system, openly criticising Ukraine and re-engaging with Russia, and even threatening to take Greenland by force. They may appear unrelated, but there is one common thread.
China. China.
China.
China. China.
China.
China.
China.
China.
China.
China wants to make a deal.
China is the biggest threat to the US as the dominant superpower since the Soviet Union. China's GDP is projected to reach $25 trillion by 2030, second only to the US. America has a larger defence budget, but China's manufacturing capabilities are unrivaled. And then there's China's pragmatism. Unlike previous US administrations, China's global alliances and deals aren't underpinned by ideology. It boasts win-win deals to build highways, high-speed rail lines and other critical infrastructure without becoming embroiled in domestic conflicts, regime change or multi-trillion-dollar wars. Today, on Counterpoint,
and things like that. So things are changing, thanks also to the example that Italy brought in lowering the rates of illegal migration. So we are working now together. So I'm optimistic on that.
Good. I hope so. Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
I'd like to ask President Meloni if you have discussed the option of starting a deal with Italy on telecommunications, and President Trump, if you want to see the Google company growing up.
The Google what?
The Google company.
What about
the
it?
Google business. If you want to see it growing up, separate.
Go ahead, please.
Oh, well, we didn't discuss about Starlink. We've been discussing about defense space. We will work together also in the Mars missions. So there are big things to do together, but we didn't discuss
No, tariffs are making us rich. We were losing a lot of money under Biden, trillions of dollars, trillions on trade. And now that whole tide has turned. We're making a lot of money. We're taking in a lot of money. Don't forget, we're taking in 25% on cars, 25% on steel, 25% on aluminum, 10% baseline. We put penalties on China for sending us fentanyl. We put penalties on Mexico and Canada, 25% for allowing fentanyl and allowing the borders to be weak. Now we're taking in billions and billions of dollars while I sit here and talk to you. And we didn't take in anything before, other than the tariffs that I put on previous to Biden, which were the tariffs I put on China, where we took in, up until this point, probably $700 billion. They were Trump tariffs. He tried to weaken them. He did everything he could. You know, he got paid money by China, right? The family got paid money, he did. And so I don't know, maybe that was the reason or maybe it wasn't, but he tried to weaken them, but he couldn't because there was so much money that his budgets, you know, they couldn't stand not doing it. But I took in the, up till this point, my tariffs on China. Nobody ever took in 10 cents from China. No other president took in 10 cents. I took in more than $700 billion from China. So we're doing very well. I mean, our country's doing very well. They had a bad, report today from one of the healthcare companies that had an impact on the stock market. But this isn't about that. This is really, we're building a base. We're building a country like no other. And again, I had the strongest economy in the history of our country by far, history of any country probably, but the history of our country in 4 years. And I think this has a chance to be much better.
Can you just clarify on the mineral bill? Will that be signed here at the White House with Ukraine on Thursday? Will President Zelensky be coming here for that?
I don't know exactly. I'm going to leave that to Scott. What do you think? Where would it be signed and when?
Yeah, we're still working on the details. We're shooting for around April 26th.
Is there any more detail that you could tell us about what's in that deal and how it came together?
It's substantially what we'd agreed on previously, but the president was here. We had a memorandum of understanding. We went straight to the big deal, and I think it's an 80-page agreement, and that's what will be signed.
President Trump, on rate cuts, can you clarify on rate cuts? Do you intend to seek Powell's firing if he doesn't change his stance on rate cuts, or is that on the table, or is that?
Well, I think he should do the rate cuts because I think if Europe has done it, it puts us at a disadvantage to Europe. I mean, he plays right into their hands. So I think he should do the rate cuts. We don't have really inflation now. I just said the major things are going down. Oil is great. Oil is way ahead of schedule, and that's because of our policies. But oil is down into the $60, $65 range now per barrel. And I told you, in certain states we have less than $2 for gasoline. And food is down. Groceries, as we call it, are down. Other than interest rates, everything's down. Interest rates are pretty flat. They're not. It's not that they're up, but we should be better than flat. We should. If he would lower the interest rate, I think it would have a good impact on that too. But the costs are down. We have very little inflation. I would say we have essentially no inflation. Hard to have inflation when oil goes down, and oil goes down. When Biden came in, oil went through the roof. That's what caused our problem. That and his very dumb spending. But when the oil prices go down, and they have gone down a lot, we've gotten it down really good. We've opened it up and we've gotten them down. And that means that people driving cars are going to be paying $2 and $2.50 instead of $4.50. And, you know, even at the end, they tried just for the purpose of the election to get it down. But they had really lost that.
Yeah, in line.
Really, it was not good. But
Yeah, in line, man.
if they had
That's
won, oil right now would be $7 or $8 because
$2.45.
of their policy, and we're going to be at about $2. Could be even a little bit less than that, and you're starting to see it. So I don't know how you can have inflation when oil has come down quite a bit, and I would say the Fed really owes it to the American people to get interest rates down. That's the only thing he's good for.
AY. They watch out. They won't devalue Naira again because of oil price don't drop. Oil price don't get $10 cheaper, and our production don't go from 2 million per barrel a day to 1.4 million. So Goldman Sachs they advise Tinubu say make it devalue the Naira again and Boroba.
And he would have an effect on that if he lowered them. And I think at some point he will. He's going to have a lot of political pressure. You know, they are political also. And I think there's a lot of political pressure for him to lower interest rates. Okay? Yeah, go ahead. Please.
Do you think that Italy can be your best ally in Europe? And also, do you ever notice when you work with your opponents?
Only if the prime minister remains the prime minister can it be our best. she's doing a great job, and yeah, certainly one of our great allies, not just in Europe, anywhere. She's a fantastic person and doing a great job, and our relationship is great. And we have a lot of Italians in this country, I tell you, and they like Trump, and they voted for Trump. Anyway, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I was in November in Beijing, it was palpable pessimism. Now I was in Shanghai last week and there was far more optimism than I expected. And it has to do with two things. One is DeepSeek and the other one is the dismantling of the American dream, basically.
Yeah, so let's take both of those then. DeepSeek, this Chinese AI, the kind of answer to ChatGPT, why is it regarded as such a breakthrough?
Well, the Americans have been really tough on China on high tech, withholding semiconductors, not allowing ASML, for example, to send their latest equipment into China. And that has really hurt them a lot. And then, of course, they realize that on AI, they're falling behind because they don't have the chips, they don't have the money, they don't have the resources US companies have. And it was a bit of a kind of concern. And then this kid comes up with DeepSeek and basically showcases that he does need foreign help. He can do it with the existing array of semiconductors. It tends to be much, much cheaper, indigenous and open. And of course, China can't believe their luck. And there's a real DeepSeek effect across the sentiment in the leadership, but also in the economy. Everybody tries to see how DeepSeek is going to impact their business.
And it's not the only evidence that China can make these breakthroughs without America. I mean, so that you've had EVs as well, where China's way ahead.
Well, China has a track record of not necessarily inventing anything new, but they are the world champions in development, in application changes and process changes. So in a way, you know, solar technology was German technologies, wind was possibly Danish or Spanish. We had EVs. I mean, my grandfather was running trucks on batteries already. But the skill set they have is, with this huge and endless, seemingly endless bench of engineers, is to take a technology, scale it up, improve it, make it less costly, and make it more efficient. And that's where it came in. So we have to watch that space. I always say that whatever China plans will be scaled up and will become eventually overcapacity. And in this respect, when the US was cutting off China from a couple of items, I said, you know, you might actually come across unintended consequences. The Chinese might come back from a completely different corner in a better fashion than you anticipated. I was in November in Beijing. It was palpable pessimism. Now I was in Shanghai last week, and there was far more.
Business with a man like that, not retaliating, keeping a cool head, has won the UK precisely no advantage so far. Is there a danger that it also means making a deal with the UK is less of a priority for President Trump?
Well, I don't think having a strong relationship with the US has given us no advantage whatsoever. We've got a very strong relationship on defence, on security, on intelligence sharing. No two countries are as closely aligned as ours. And there's
the same tariffs as everyone else now.
Huge amount of trade going between our economies. Of course, we're continuing to talk to the US about how further we can mitigate the impacts of the tariffs. But a trade war is in nobody's interest, and there's no business sector that's been impacted by these tariffs that's saying jump both feet to retaliate and cause a trade war. Nobody wants that. But what we have been able to do is to turbocharge our own economy, and that's why I announced what I did about the Z mandate, about life sciences, and this morning with Doncaster Airport being reopened. These are the things that governments can do in the United Kingdom to give people the strong economy that they need.
And while you continue to talk about keeping a cool head, you talk about negotiating a deal, the President talks about countries queuing up to kiss my ass. I mean, how comfortable are you doing business with a man like that?
Well, look, the US is our closest ally. For 80 years...
It's not comfortable language, is it?
For 80 years, we have had peace in the United Kingdom and across the continent. That is because of our relationship with the US and Europe, and underpinned by NATO. So of course we keep a cool head, of course we're calm and pragmatic in all of our responses and all of our relationships.
We're fully reviving 1033 program to provide state and local law enforcement with surplus military equipment, that we have so much of it. I did it in my last administration, and I remember Obama wouldn't do it. He wouldn't do it before me, would not do it, because he thought it made them look too strong, too military. I said, no, that's what I want them to look like. I want them to look strong. And it was protective, defensive equipment. We had billions of dollars. I gave it out, and now I'm going to have a chance to give it out again. But we also want to have them in D.C. We're fully reviving 1033 program to provide state and local law enforcement with surplus military equipment that we have so much of it. I did it in my last administration, and I remember Obama wouldn't do it. He wouldn't do it before me, would not do it because he thought it made them look too strong, too military. I said, no, that's what I want them to look like. I want them to look strong. And it was protective, defensive equipment. We had billions of dollars. I gave it out, and now I'm going to have a chance to give it out again. But we also want to have them in D.C. And
the potential of the city to even have a brighter future is, you can feel it. But are we losing it? And right now, there are other states, quite frankly, that are more attractive now. And, you know, you're seeing more and more of the firm's population are asking, can I move to other places? Because they're worried about, okay, the cost of housing here, the crime, the cost of education, all the things that are facing us. And so when I think about BlackRock, we have 21,000 employees worldwide. But we have not grown our New York City platform other than through these acquisitions at all in the last 7-8 years. We're still basically stuck at 4,000 employees here in New York City. And that's not how it should be. And so, yes, this is a time where we all have to stand up as leaders now. If we want to reclaim the glory of New York City, we have to stand up more.
Economically, the game is over. The Chinese, if not already a wealthier economic unit than we are, which they probably are, will be within a few years. Very few, like by the end of this decade, if not already. So economically, they are now our equal. But remember, they're our equal. They're going up. We're going down. We're equal, but the trajectory is unmistakable across the board. All right? And so politically, it comes right after that. If you're that powerful economically, if you're the place that the whole world goes to cut a deal because you get a better deal than you can get from Washington or London, which is now most of the time the case. That's why if you look at the biggest harbor being built in Africa, it's being built by the Chinese. If you look at the new railroads going across parts of Latin America, it's built by the Chinese. You know, on and on and on. You know, the Panama Canal, why does he want to take it? Well, the United States is the number one country using the Panama Canal. China's number two. China has built all these buildings to handle their shipping. You know, it's everywhere, and once you start looking, you see it everywhere. But militarily, there's none of that. Americans have to understand, even if you don't agree with economically, the game is over. The Chinese,
number one,
if not already a
President Trump's
wealthier
focus
economic
on the
unit
criminal,
than we are, which
the criminal element to get them out will take some time. And so get that done. And then on the illegal immigrant that's here that has behaved, that's where the problem is going to be, because there's going to be, if you deport the immigrants that are here illegally that haven't committed a crime, then you're going to start to really feel it in the business sector, in the employment sector. We don't have enough people in America to do the work. So ideally, take the people that are here, figure out a way to make them legal, get them on the tax rolls, and let them continue to help build our economy. Because if you look at North America, Julie, it's the greatest trading bloc in the world. And if you fully integrate North America, we will dominate the global economy for the next 100 years. So how you integrate global America, because Mexico keeps us young. And so China has a demographic problem, Japan's got a demographic problem, Europe's got a problem. We in North America will stay young, but we have to have the vision of integration.
So when he adopted his anti-corruption campaign, it wasn't just to get rid of his enemies. It was actually a genuinely popular move to clean up the corrupt system, and throughout the country, people appreciated him. He was one of the most popular leaders anywhere in the world for his anti-corruption campaign. And I would say the first few years, this was very successful. But fundamentally, corruption cannot be completely removed that way by just through anti-corruption campaign. You might have something more positive. And his positive side was to control, to ask the Communist Party to be disciplined, to return to their roots, to be dedicated to the country's interests, dedicated to the revolutionary ideals and so on. So in order to do that, he needed to control. He needed to actually promote people who would support those ideals and get rid of those people who are corrupted and so on. And in so doing, he began to mass his powers into a very narrow group of people under his leadership. So you can say that he's a dictator, but I don't think he sought to be a dictator. He had no choice. If he wanted to save the Communist Party, if he did not control the party, he couldn't succeed. So as a result, his primary purpose was more political than economic.
You had Fukuyama write The End of History, which basically said that democratic capitalism is the end-all be-all, and we're bound to one system, and the whole world's going to run on that system. That philosophy then animated a neoliberal and neoconservative consensus in Washington for 25 years. And there were three key pillars of that, let's call it globalist consensus. Number one, we'd have open borders, free flow of labor. In fact, the Wall Street Journal editorial, which is considered to be conservative, actually supported a constitutional amendment saying that we'd have open borders. Number two, we'd have open flows of trade and capital, so basically the unfettered free trade agenda. And then number three, the third leg of it, was Pax Americana. We'd deploy American troops all over the world to defend this consensus because they'd be greeted as liberators, not occupiers. I think all three pillars have been refuted. And the person who has represented the shift in this consensus is Donald Trump. When you have a bipartisan consensus that I'd say included both Bush Republicans and Clinton Democrats around these three pillars of globalism, and then the country turns against that, that's not going to be a smooth process. It's going to be a disruptive process.
Were you surprised that Donald Trump won the election?
No.
Why do you think he won?
People were angry at the what they call it, the state, the swamp, ineffective government, that people wanted kind of more pro-growth and pro-business policies, that they didn't want to be lectured to on social policies continuously. I think it's the lecturing part of it. It's the social superiority. It's the my way or the highway. I traveled around this country. I felt it wherever I went.
And when we dismantle the government, we're going to miss it. But we're going to miss it only after disasters. And that's not a price that we should be paying. And it is not a price we should be paying, especially because the reorganization of the government, rethinking about the government are not based on an empirical approach, a careful approach. It is based on this kind of a ideological approach. So that's my worst case scenario, right? So something really bad happens and that has global implications. Look at 9/11. 9/11 changed the world history. Invasion of the Iraq, which was totally a war of choice rather than a war of necessity, was due to 9/11, right? So we cannot underestimate sometimes these shocks that are happening can change the world history. And I'm afraid that the next one may happen.
Indonesia trade surpluses are with India, with US, with Philippines, and with EU. On India, it is a lot of coal and a bit of palm oil. On the US, it's a lot of textile. With the EU, it's quite diversified. Last year, 8 billion trade surplus for Indonesia. The year before, 11 billion trade surplus. We are not imposing any tariffs or tax or any arbitrary measure. We are a reliable and predictable partner. Indonesia is a champion of palm oil. Fantastic production. 50% used internally, 50% exported. Out of these 50%, only 5% are exported to the EU. 5% of the total production of palm oil in Indonesia is exported to the EU. Out of these 5%, 3 to 4% are through big plantations that have been certified some time ago. Who are the big importers of palm oil in the EU? Unilever, Ferrero Rocher, they have been certified for years and they are providing very good money. So we are talking about 1 to 2% of the production of palm oil in Indonesia affected by the EUDR. Look at the big pictures of the trade flows.
The Chinese have hit back at Trump. The US tariffs on Chinese goods went into effect a few minutes ago, 5 GMT. But the Chinese now have put a 15% tariff on US coal and US LNG, plus an additional 10% tariff on crude oil, farm equipment, and some autos. But wait for it, Google has been dragged into this. Google is now the subject of the anti-monopoly regulator in China launching an investigation. This just expanded.
And yet today we are here before the Senate because one person in our country wishes to raise taxes. Well, this is contrary to everything our country was founded upon. One person is not allowed to raise taxes. The Constitution forbids it. The Constitution was so concerned with the power of taxes, which some have said the power of taxes is the power to destroy. But our founding fathers were so concerned with this that they said no, because one person in our country wishes to raise taxes. Well, this is contrary to everything our country was founded upon. One person is not allowed to raise taxes. The Constitution forbids it. The Constitution was so concerned with the power of taxes, which some have said the power of taxes is the power to destroy. But our founding fathers were so concerned with this that they said no, the president will not have the power to legislate. The president will not have the power to tax. Only Congress will be able to tax the people, and only by originating tax bills in the House. It was that specific. They were so mortified. They were so worried by having a monarchy. They were so worried about having all the power gravitate to the executive that they said we must split the powers.
Economically, the game is over. The Chinese, if not already a wealthier economic unit than we are, which they probably are, will be within a few years. Very few, like by the end of this decade, if not already. So economically, they are now our equal. But remember, they're our equal. They're going up. We're going down. We're equal, but the trajectory is unmistakable across the board. Right? And so politically, it comes right after that. If you're that powerful economically, if you're the place that the whole world goes to cut a deal because you get a better deal than you can get from Washington or London, which is now most of the time the case. That's why if you look at the biggest harbor being built in Africa, it's being built by the Chinese. If you look at the new railroads going across parts of Latin America, it's built by the Chinese. You know, on and on and on. You know, the Panama Canal, why does he want to take it? Well, the United States is the number one country using the Panama Canal. China's number two. China has built all these buildings to handle their shipping. You know, it's everywhere, and once you start looking, you see it everywhere. But militarily, there's none of that. Americans have to understand, even if you don't agree with.
The world is now changing. Diplomats say there's plan B and plan A. Plan A is what Sir Keir Starmer's trying to do, which is bridge the divide, keep the Americans involved, engage them, try and influence.
Kind of classic.
Yeah, classic, but also, be aware that life's going to change and we're going to spend more on defence, we're going to have to do more for Ukraine by ourselves, and we might end up with a mess there. But that's all plan A. Plan B is when there is a fundamental fissure between Europe and the United States. And, the UK, in that scenario, the UK's nuclear deterrent becomes, powerless because we rely on the Americans for our Trident nuclear weapons. That we're in a place where Europe, the Americans withdraw substantial conventional forces from Europe. In that scenario, Donald Trump goes to Moscow at the invitation of Vladimir Putin to attend the May Day parades, right? And in that context, we're in a completely different space. But that plan B is being discussed right now, what Europe has to do. So it's not just, should we spend a bit more? Should we, tweak our debt spending rules so that we can spend a bit more than the EU rules currently allow? This is about fundamentally having to rethink the way Europe is and exists.
To understand why Donald Trump's tariff policy is insane, consider this. He says that the rest of the world has been ripping the U.S. off. The U.S. is the great victim here. We're going to be liberated. Go anywhere else in the rest of the world, they'll tell you the U.S. has done better than any country in the world in the last 30 or 40 years. U.S. technology companies dominate the world. U.S. banks dominate the world. We sell trillions of dollars of services to the rest of the world. And Trump thinks we're somehow the suckers in this system, and so he's going to burn the house down. It's just stupid. It's also mean. Because what is going to happen is these tariffs, which are taxes, the largest tax increase in 60 years in America, they hurt the poor, the lower middle class the most, because all sales taxes hurt the poor. It's also hurting the poorest countries in the world the most, because they're the ones desperate to get out of poverty, and they can't now export anything to the U.S. Madagascar can't export its vanilla to climb out of poverty. Stupid and mean. That defines Trump's tariff policies.
So here's the basic plan. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to invest in the Marine Corps and the entire United States military like we never have before. Over $1 trillion we're going to invest in building up the manufacturing base of this country so that you guys, when you do go to war, when you have to go to war, you've got the best weapons anywhere in the world. We know from the long history of the United States of America that while the leading edge of American power is you all, it really matters what you guys have in your hands and what you guys have on your backs when you go to war. And so I promised you, from the President of the United States, we are going to send you, if we have to send you to war, with the best equipment, the best ammunition, the best weapons, and we are going to empower you guys to win when you have to. That's the purpose of the United States Marine Corps, am I right?
Well, if you're really trying to contain China, it's not just a trade war, but restriction to technology, to financial activity, to investment both ways, and so on, imply a strategy of full economic containment of China, what China is really worrying about. The US is trying to prevent the rise of China. If you do that, you have a risk of a true war, because the only thing that is constraining China from going and trying to take over Taiwan, either to an invasion or a blockade, is the fact that they know that the US might punish China by doing what they've done with Russia, meaning total trade embargo, no economic activity with China, and that would be highly painful for China. But if you are going to a world of trade tariffs of 145%, of full economic containment, then that leads to a trade war that becomes an economic war, that leads then to this Cold War becoming colder, and eventually a hot war in the case of Taiwan. Why should China restrain itself with Taiwan and not take it over if it is losing the global markets of the US? Those who think that they can contain China, I think they're really playing with fire, because that's very, very dangerous. What you can do is to do a grand bargain with China, where you do a deal where you de-risk the relation of China by decoupling in technology, because the things that are critical to US and China, there has to be full decoupling, but then you do trade on everything else. We don't care about Chinese toys or consumer products being cheap in US. We're worried about advanced tech or EVs or semiconductors or things of that sort. So if you reach a grand bargain, then you still have a division of the world in two, but this is a technological division. It is not a full decoupling, it's de-risking what's important.
All right, let's update you on the tariffs. Chinese President Xi Jinping is going to Vietnam, Malaysia, and Cambodia. Hey, President Xi, let me just break it to you. Those folks have no money at all. Okay, they cannot help you. They're not going to buy your stuff because they don't have any money. All right, and so I don't know why you're going there because. Yeah, now, maybe he's trying to sneak in Chinese goods under the Vietnamese label, but that's going to be easily exposed. So I don't even know what this is. You know, if China loses the U.S. market, and I still believe there's going to be a détente here, it's hosed. It's just screwed. Because we have the money. We buy the stuff. The Malays aren't going to buy your stuff. They don't have any money.
Laura, a green card holder, even if I might like that green card holder, doesn't have an indefinite right to be in the United States of America, right? American citizens have different rights from people who have green cards, from people who have student visas. And so my attitude on this is, this is not fundamentally about free speech. And to me, yes, it's about national security, but it's also more importantly about who do we, as an American public, decide gets to join our national community? And if the Secretary of State and the President decide this person shouldn't be in America and they have no legal right to stay here, it's as simple as that.
Do you see more such deportations happening?
I think we'll certainly see some people who get deported on student visas if we determine that it's not in the best interest of the United States to have them in our country. So yeah, I don't know how high that number is going to be, but you're going to see more people.
And I would say it is wrong to assume that the Chinese people are content with what is happening today. The vast majority, particularly that young generation, who've shown how the world works in a more liberal, globalized way, and now be told, not by the Chinese alone, by the world, because of China's growth and success, but the world is now trying to contain and prevent that from developing more naturally and normally. And they are just wondering whether this is because of other people's evil intentions and anti-China feelings, or also because the nature of the Chinese system doesn't allow them to gain that kind of creative position that would make China better off and all the people of China better off. Mm-hmm. That tension is still not resolved in my view. And I think that tension will grow because these young people are not going to just sit back and accept everything.
Over the last 3 months, our nation has faced an unprecedented threat from our nearest neighbor, a threat to our borders, a threat to our sovereignty, a threat to our very right to exist as an independent democratic nation. Donald Trump thought we were going to be an easy mark, that we'd be a pushover. Oh, how wrong he was. And now Canada standing up to him has made Canada the front line in the defense against the MAGA ideology. So no wonder Donald Trump and MAGA are feeling pretty angry at Canada. But what concerns me is the targeting of Canadian citizens who are crossing the border to work or to visit. We have seen too many stories of citizens being pulled out of airport lines and being fingerprinted and deported as though they were criminals. Citizens being kidnapped through illegal detention by ICE. And it's not just Canadians. We see the attack on backpackers, students, doctors, professors. I am here today to say to Canadians to avoid travel to the United States if at all possible, and to call our government to stand up for our Canadian citizens who are being denied their rights by arbitrary detention in the United States today. Canada must stand up for our citizens and for the rule of law. Because what we're seeing, for example, with cops pulling over the folk duo Cassie and Maggie to harass them for being Canadian, is not the actions of a democratic nation. People whose phones are being seized and searched for any kind of incriminating evidence that they're somehow progressive or woke, that's not the actions of a democratic nation. That is the creep of totalitarianism. That is the creep of fascism, and we need to call that out.
The government refused to provide any of those pieces of information that the judge ordered them to provide. Not only the information about what future steps they're planning to take, they even refused to answer the question about what they've done so far, and they even refused to answer the question about where Kilmer Abrego Garcia is today. For the second time in this case, they sent a lawyer into court who had no answers. The government attorney did say that they intend to comply with the order and bring him back. That's the bare minimum. They should have done that already. They've had plenty of time between the Supreme Court's order early yesterday evening and now. He should be here in the United States. It's a 5-hour flight. Yeah, that was the most shocking thing of all, that the attorney for the government wasn't even prepared to answer the question, where is Kilmer Abrego today and what is his custodial status? I was very dismayed and disheartened by the fact that they wouldn't answer such a straightforward question.
You mentioned that you're open to deporting individuals that aren't foreign aliens but are criminals to El Salvador. Does that include potentially U.S. citizens, fully naturalized Americans?
If they're criminals and if they hit people with baseball bats over their head that happen to be 90 years old, and if they rape 87-year-old women in Coney Island, Brooklyn, yeah, that includes them. What do you think? There's special category of person? They're as bad as anybody that comes in. We have bad ones too, and I'm all for it because we can do things with the president for less money and have great security. And we have a huge prison population. We have a huge number of prisons, and then we have the private prisons, and some are operated well, I guess, and some aren't. But he does a great job with that. We have others that we're negotiating with too. But no, if it's a homegrown criminal, I have no problem. Now, we're studying the laws right now. Pam is studying. If we can do that, that's good. And I'm talking about violent people. I'm talking about really bad people. Really bad people. Every bit as bad as the ones coming.
The president says he has a great relationship with Chinese President Xi. He's willing to speak with him directly. Why doesn't the president just pick up the phone and get this ball going?
All of the things the president just said are true. The president, as I said from the podium just a few days ago when I was up here, would be gracious if China intends to make a deal with the United States. If China continues to retaliate, it's not good for China. The United States of America is the strongest, best economy in the world, as evidenced by the more than 75 countries who have called the administration immediately to cut good deals. So the president wants to do what's right for the American people. He wants to see fair trade practices around the globe, and that's his intention and his goal.
So is he waiting for China to make the first move here?
I'm not going to comment on communications that are happening or may not be happening, or either way. We'll leave it to our national security team to get these discussions underway.
Why is he optimistic that China's going to make a deal or wants to make a deal if they're not talking? Where's that optimism come
He's
from?
optimistic.
Trump does not want the losing hand. This is why it is more likely than not this war will end, because Trump and President Putin will agree to end the war. If Europe does all its great warmongering, it doesn't matter. The war is ending. So get it out of your system. Please tell your colleagues it's over. And it's over because Trump doesn't